The world is divided into 4 spheres, each sphere divided among continents and nations. Nations are divided by borders and interests. These interests divide the news. We examine the impact of these divisions on people and power. This is Imaginary Lines.
Welcome to Imaginary Lines. I'm your host, Michael Fox. On August 25th, hundreds marched in cities across the United States against the ongoing violence facing Black transgender women. Just the week before, organizers had learned of the murder of 5 transgender women in just one day. Black Lives Matter joined the call for the marches last week. I'll speak with Elle Hearns. She's an organizer of last week's marches about the plight of transgender women in the United States and their struggle for justice and liberation. But first, let's take a look at media in Latin America.
Con esta aprobación, la Asamblea Nacional da un respaldo irrestricto a la lucha que libra el gobierno nacional contra los fenómenos como el paramilitarismo, narcotráfico y contrabando de extracción que atentan contra el pueblo venezolano.
On August 21st, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro declared a state of exception in response to violence perpetrated by paramilitary groups in the border region with Colombia.
Una realidad espantosa de cómo se ha posicionado el delito, la criminalidad, la economía criminal, el paramilitarismo en toda esta región de Venezuela. Yo estoy obligado a defender a Venezuela, a liberar a Venezuela de todo esto.
This is the first time a state of exception has been implemented since the approval of the 1999 Venezuelan Constitution. The state of exception differs from a state of emergency in that human rights are still guaranteed. Unfortunately, many news organizations have erroneously conflated the two, either out of ignorance or an effort to smear the Venezuelan government.
Los colombianos están escondidos y se protegen ante los operativos de la Guardia Venezolana, como en los tiempos bíblicos cuando Herodes buscaba a los niños o la persecución de los judíos en el siglo pasado.
Venezuela is dealing with a serious threat posed by paramilitary groups that are not only disposed to using violence, as was evidenced by the recent attack on Venezuelan soldiers, but are involved in complex operations such as smuggling, extortion, and drug trafficking. The government also alleges that members of the political opposition are cooperating with the paramilitaries. But instead of reporting on the gravity of this situation, many media outlets have opted to tarnish Venezuela, accusing the government of seeking a scapegoat and criticizing the deportations of undocumented Colombians living in Venezuela. Corporate media has continued to criticize Venezuela for its shaky economy, yet the closure of the border with Colombia has revealed just how much of an impact the smuggling of cheap goods into Colombia has on shortages in Venezuela. Of course, this went largely unmentioned in most media. The term paramilitary failed to appear at all in many articles, though when it comes to coverage of Venezuela, deliberate omission and manipulation are par for the course.
Compañeros y compañeras, Jessie is not the first queer, gender non-confirming person of color whose life has been taken in this way.
The stats are sobering. Since the beginning of 2015, over 19 trans women and gender non-conforming individuals have been murdered in the United States. At least 13 of them were Black. A study in the American Bar Association Journal reported that well over a third of all transgender people questioned reported that they had attempted suicide. And according to an op-ed in The Advocate, the average life expectancy of a Black transgender woman is only 35 years. As a recent report stated, transgender and Black transgender people face discrimination and injustice at literally every turn. But many are fighting back. With the hashtag #SayHerName and events like last Tuesday's March for Trans Liberation Day, trans leaders, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, are responding to the violence facing Black transgender women and demanding justice. Elle Hearns helped to organize the marches last week. She hails from Columbus, Ohio, where she's a strategic partner with Black Lives Matter and the Central Regional Coordinator for Get Equal, a US-based organization fighting for LGBTQ rights. Elle, thank you so much for joining me on Imaginary Lines.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly a pleasure to be with you today and all of your audience.
Let's start by talking about the Trans Liberation Day of actions on August 25th. Why were those launched? What was the meaning behind this?
Absolutely. In the collaboration with Black Lives Matter and the three co-founders of the hashtag Black Lives Matter and all of the chapters that have formed across the country of Black Lives Matter, it has consistently been a work in progress towards making sure there are reflective efforts towards solidarity with queer and trans folks. And so it was really a call to action that was necessary to to be in response to the murders most recently of 5 Black trans women that we learned about in one day here. Um, and so it was a call to action that was necessary for the Black Lives Matter movement that has essentially formed to make sure that there's a call to action around this community that's never had that opportunity to see our cisgender counterparts be outraged, and also to have the opportunity to mourn collectively as Black people.
You mentioned 5 Black transgender women were killed. Was that over a 1 or 2 day period? And what's the reality on the ground?
Yeah, the reality is that we learned about the murders of Black trans women in one day. So some of the murders that we learned about were new, and some of the murders that we learned about were not new. When I say not new, meaning that one of the murders that we learned about was a Black trans woman who has been missing since last year. Her remains were actually found on the same day where we learned about the murders of multiple other Black trans women. So, because of the misreporting of gender, a lot of times we are late to learning about the deaths of our Black trans sisters across the country.
Nearly 20 transgender women have been killed this year. 13 of them have been Black. Why are these numbers so high? It seems like there's almost an epidemic happening here.
Absolutely. It is an epidemic because these are people from our communities. These are women who have been forgotten about. These are women who have been discarded. These are women who have not been taken care of. And when I say taken care of, they haven't been taken care of by their families. They haven't been taken care of by their communities. They haven't been taken care of the system that is in place. And so that's the reason why we continuously see these numbers rising. We have already surpassed the amount of trans women, period, that have been murdered from last year, but we've also surpassed the amount of Black trans women that have been murdered. And so consistently with these murders, we're seeing that trans women of color are most impacted. And at the center of that impact are the Black trans women whose names we continuously learn about. And even just recently, we learned about Keisha Blige, who was murdered actually in March. But because she was misgendered in Chicago, we just learned about her murder as well. Yeah, so that's a reflection of just the systems that are in place to really discard people.
I'm trying to get a sense of the circumstances behind the deaths of so many transgendered women, and particularly Black transgendered women this year. Is this coming from police violence? What's behind this?
I think at the center of most of these murders is the violence perpetuated by people that the victims know. There's been a murder of one Black trans woman by a security law enforcement group in the DMV area in Baltimore, Maya Hall. And so that is the one reported murder that I'm aware of currently at this time that was at the hands of security or police. A lot of the murders essentially are linked to transphobia. A lot of the murders are happening from intimate partner violence. And so I think like there's many different railroads in regards to how these murders are happening. And so it's important to note those, because a lot of what happens is the blame just gets placed on the people who are responsible for the actual murders, as opposed to linking them into the systems that resulted in these trans women having to like go through these parallels that got them connected to these individuals who murdered them in the first place.
Can you speak about the liberation of transgender people? I know there's a lot of organizing happening on the ground, particularly linked up with Black Lives Matter.
What's exciting is that there's never been a time where any social justice movement, any civil rights movement has declared that all Black lives matter. there's never been that consistent rallying cry. And so part of the work that we've really been instrumental in doing is making sure that when we say Black Lives Matter, it is a reflection of all Black lives. So that means that we are centering voices, that means that we are centering experiences that often get overlooked. So our folks with criminal records, our folks who are disabled, our folks who are queer and trans, especially because of the amount of transphobia that is directed, homophobia that is directed, anti-Blackness that is directed. We are consistently making space to elevate the conversation around what liberation looks like. We don't want to just be liberated from prisons. We want to be liberated from everything that essentially is continuously keeping Black life in shackles.
What's your analysis of the media coverage around transgender women, particularly in the United States, but also internationally?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent question because the media has so much power and so much privilege to actually tell the story. And a lot of the times the media has told the story incorrectly and also has not held itself accountable into the ways that they uplift stories that are untrue about Black people. And so what we see a lot of is the criminalizing of Black people in death. So an example always for me that sticks out is the fact that Mike Brown, a 17-year-old child's body was left in the street for hours. And in that time of his body being there, there was questions around whether or not he robbed a store. And basically, it just dehumanized him as a person and also as a child to say that he essentially deserved his death or his demise. And I think that that's consistently something we've seen with the media in regards to Black trans women who are murdered. We've seen the media misgender them, but also pull up police records. We've seen them take mug shots from Black trans women and actually use that to accompany an article about their deaths. So it basically paints this picture that these folks, these Black people, are deserving of death because of whatever wrong they did.
Elle, thank you so much for your insight and your work. It's been a pleasure to have you on Imaginary Lines.
Thank you so much. It's truly been a pleasure.
And now for an analysis of the latest corruption scandal in Guatemala. Just a week before national elections, a long-standing corruption scandal is continuing to rock Guatemala. Known as La Línea, or the Line, the scandal involves the funneling of custom taxes into private bank accounts, and it appears that Guatemalan President Otto Pérez Molina is only barely holding on to power. His former vice president has been arrested, key figures in his cabinet have resigned, and even former allies, such as the country's Chamber of Commerce, have demanded he leave office. Yet Pérez Molina continues to defy calls for him to step down, professing his innocence in a televised address last week and reiterating that he would not resign.
Les afirmo que no renunciaré y que con toda entereza enfrentaré.
Guatemalans responded to the president's defiance by taking to social media and declaring, "I don't have a president." Angered by the corruption allegations, launched a new round of protests last week demanding Pérez Molina's resignation. Yet many outlets, unfortunately, do not give these demonstrators enough credit. Had it not been for the thousands of people regularly marching on the streets for the past 4 months, this might have played out like so many other corruption scandals, with only a few token measures taken to whitewash the problem. Guatemalans appear to be emboldened. Elections are set for September 6th, but many say they cannot take place under the current conditions and that campaign finance reform is badly needed. If the elections do take place, high rates of abstention may eliminate whatever legitimacy Guatemala's political system has left.